C. Ben will be chatting with us about his career, his views of networking and relationships, and working in conflict zone countries. We do have questions we'll be asking Ben, but this is also your chance to ask questions to someone who has sat in the treasurer's seat. Scotty will be monitoring the conversation, so please feel free to drop them in the comments, or drop any questions in the comments. We'll get them answered for you. Ben, thanks for joining us. How are you today?
I am good. Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Where are you joining us from in the world?
I am in Jacksonville, Florida, so kind of the far northeast part of the state.
Awesome. Well, again, you're in a much warmer climate than I am, so thank you very much for taking the time out of the sunshine to join us. We do have Simon and Scotty on the line. Simon, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well. I've just been learning a lot about alligators in Florida. I'm intrigued and looking forward to hearing more from Ben.
Yep, absolutely. And Scotty is on mute, monitoring the conversation, so he'll be joining us here shortly. With that, Ben, we're going to kick it off. Simon's going to start us off. Let's get rolling here.
Ben, I wanted to ask you, and just for the listeners, we'll come and cover a bit more on Ben's background in a second, but he has progressed really. Had a bit of a dream run from a growth perspective, starting off as a junior assistant within the banking administration and progressing all the way to treasurer in a relatively quick time. What's been your secret, Ben, in terms of getting that, and what have been some of the highlights along the way?
Yeah, I had sort of a interesting first job title in corporate treasury. About as low on that particular totem pole as you can go, which was fine with me. I was fresh out of school and ready to take on the world, but I think they already had an assistant banking administrator, so I got the junior title. But the first treasury group I worked in was about 25 people. It was large, I think by most companies' definitions, and that was kind of split between banking administration responsibilities, the folks that opened and closed and maintained the bank accounts and the signers, and it was an insurance company and kind of a real estate investment conglomerate. So there were thousands and thousands of bank accounts. It was a very important function within the treasury group and the company. And then the other half was the cash management and capital management aspect, which also front-faced the banking relationship. So I came in as certainly the lowest person on the totem pole, and very early on I took a look at the environment and the folks I was working with and around, and the folks above me, and kind of said, okay, how can I progress, and what is the best way to do that? And the logical answer was to learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could. And I sort of decided very early on to do a lot of the things that nobody else seemed to really want to do or weren't doing. The drudge work, the work that we're all familiar with, the opening of accounts, closing of accounts, the maintenance of signers, your customer compliance, vendor compliance, systems maintenance, all the stuff that absolutely needs to be done, but isn't the sexiest thing to do. So I kind of picked up as much of that as I could, and in the process learned an incredible amount. And what I couldn't learn on my own, I had some good people around me and above me that were willing to answer questions. So I would say that was kind of a defining point for me, because later, a little bit later, after I had taken over management of the cash management group, once I proved that I had some systems acumen and was fairly good at cash management, made sense to me. I challenged the company and my bosses on why we were doing certain things, why we weren't doing certain things. And bear in mind, I was brand new to this discipline, so I might have been a little bit of a pain in the neck, but but they answered my questions or set me about on answering the questions they couldn't, and that was just a huge learning experience for me. So it sort of proved out what I thought early on, which was, treasury is a discipline where you can and should ask a lot of questions. Nobody's necessarily going to hand you a list of questions that need to be answered. They'll give you a list of tasks that need to be done, but the question we should all be asking is what else needs to be done, or why are we doing things that way? So once I'd sort of proved my mettle a little bit, I was running the cash management group fairly shortly thereafter. And that particular company was very acquisitive at the time. We were doing about an acquisition every month or 2 months for a period of about 3 years. It was, ranging in size, but it was a very active time. So it was a great learning environment. We were also doing a lot of spinoffs, some of which turned into IPOs. So with a couple of those spinoffs and IPOs, I went with the resulting company, took on increasing levels of responsibility and roles and staff oversight, interfacing directly with our banks and our lenders, which was one of my favorite things to do. I had a little bit of capital markets experience coming in to that particular job, but not what I would consider significant. So it all sort of swirled around to really buoy my expectations and really what I loved and ended up loving about Treasury. And accepted my first treasurer role a little over 10 years ago. After kind of moving through the ranks, I was moving from the junior banking administrator to analyst to senior analyst to director to assistant treasurer, and then to treasurer. And my first treasurer role was very much a product of luck and timing, which sometimes those things are, but also really a product of kind of the work I'd put in early in my career. I was the guy that could fix things when things broke. I knew who to call when information didn't come from the banks or we couldn't get information to them. Just some of those fundamentals were really, really important to my career progression and reinforcing my my CFOs and my CEOs and really the boards of faith that I kind of knew what I was doing. Or if I didn't know exactly what I was doing, that I knew how to figure it out, or the avenues to figure it out. So I accepted my first treasurer role in a very dynamic environment. The company was working on a big IPO. We were going through multiple debt capital raises and restructurings. Luckily, I had a CFO that had kind of watched me progress and was willing to give me the support and backing that I needed to do to get done what I needed to get done. And he and I had a very important understanding that I think is important generally in a treasury group, because we're the tip of the spear, and sometimes we're not going to have all the answers, but we need to find them out very quickly. And you can't reverse a wire transfer. I mean, some of the things that our colleagues in accounting and other places can reverse, we just can't. So the accuracy of your information and your decision making is absolutely critical. And having somebody above you and beside you that supports that is hugely helpful. Not always the case, but hugely helpful. I happen to have that, so we were able to accomplish the things that I was tasked to do in my first treasurer role, and off I went from there.
Ben, I always say to people that, look at the different environments and pick the experience that you want to get as part of your career development. But part of that is, you go to a big company, 25 people in Treasury is a big company with a big team, and therefore the roles within that tend to be quite narrow. But then it sounds like you were in utopia, because within that you were spinning off businesses. So you were able to go to one of the spin-offs where you get broader roles, you're getting a much more exposure because the teams are smaller. Am I reading that right?
Yes, no, absolutely. You're reading it right. And it's a good point. 25 people is a large treasury group. That particular group was probably not the most efficient at the time I joined it, but we made it more efficient. That was, we were able to reduce headcount and invest in some systems, and Nobody likes firing people, but you don't work for a large corporation, you know, to hand out money to everybody that works there. So, you know, one of our responsibilities as Treasury professionals is to not only manage and preserve capital, but also to look for those risks and opportunities, manage cost structures, tear apart the financial statements and see where are we spending money. Treasury should know where we're spending money, but why are we spending it there? Who are our top vendors? Why are there our top vendors? And that particular environment, and I would say anybody who's in an environment that's very dynamic, that's large, if you're doing acquisitions, if you're doing spinoffs, jump in, get involved. And I wasn't handed these increasing levels of responsibility and roles. I had to go ask and kind of raise my hand and say, you know, give me a shot. We just bought this company. We're spinning it out. It's going to go public. You know, what do you need to be done? And oh, by the way, what's the grunt work that needs to be done? And just remember that, you know, when you're volunteering for the work that's not the most glamorous, that's a great opportunity to learn how those things happen. The chairman and the CEO and the CFO get to stand on the NYSE paddock and ring the bell, but they didn't do all the work.
It's a good segue, Ben, and I honestly feel like I could take a guess here, the answer, but I'll just ask it anyway. What would you say if you could go back in time and give advice, one piece of advice to, you know, to yourself as you started out your career? What would that advice be?
Great question. I love this question. I've hit on it a little bit. It would be to, you know, look at your environment and look at what is being done in your particular organization, and look for opportunities to better your understanding. Number one, as a Treasury professional, it's very easy to do in Treasury. There are lots of resources, lots of things you can do without, you know, going to your boss and needing to spend money. I mean, it's just a very open discipline and a very dynamic area within a company to be able to ask questions and kind of go and say, I want to learn these things. For me, it was learning the fundamentals. And the fundamental, when I say fundamentals, I really mean the fundamentals of Treasury operations. If you become a Treasury operations expert, I mean, the sky's the limit. Some of the best people I've ever had work for me were some of the best Treasury operations people on earth, but they could do it in their sleep. You know, I could teach them the other stuff, or at least expose them to the more strategic and capital markets oriented, or, you know, if we were running insurance portfolios or investment portfolios, I could pull them into that. But as a treasurer, I needed to know that they had a firm grounding in those fundamentals. And I understood from my, you know, my career progression that they were going to have to, you know, take a significant amount of initiative to learn those things. And it's great if you have a treasurer and a CFO and a management team that will support you on those things, but you may not always. Don't be afraid to go out there and like I said, ask those questions. Learn how your company earns revenue. Hugely important. I mean, I could not answer that for a couple of companies that I worked for earlier in my career. I knew generally, but if you put me in front of a board of directors, I would have failed. Learn how your company earns revenue. Learn how it settles its daily financial obligations and why. What banks are you working with and why? And don't be afraid to sort of, like I said, make a list of questions, ask why you're doing certain things, and you know, ask the person beside you. If they don't know, go ask your boss. Unless you have a very undesirable type of boss, they should be more than willing to answer those questions and then tell them why you're asking.
So many great themes there based on, you know, the conversations that we have and speaking with the people who advance in their careers and ultimately sit in the treasurer's seat. It's acting with intent. It's It's trying to fix what's broken when you don't even realize when it's broken. It's not sitting back and waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder. It's going and attacking and acting with intent. And you mentioned, part of that is if you don't know the answer, be able to go to your network, go to your boss, pop your head up, go develop relationships in other parts of the business. What's been your approach to networking and mentorship throughout your career, and what advice would you give to the audience in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, Joe. So much of the Treasury discipline is handed down knowledge and experience. I think things are getting much better in terms of documentation and reading material. And if anybody hasn't just purchased and read the study manual for the Certified Treasury Professional or the CIA in Europe, I mean, do it. There is huge amounts of knowledge in there, things that you may, even themes you may not, you may think you know, but you may not know. So, that would be, I guess, one of my first admonitions. My approach to networking, I mean, networking in any profession is hugely important. And this is coming from, I'm not a natural networker. I have to work at it. I can be very personable when I want to be, but it is something that I have to work at. And I don't think that's atypical, especially for folks that are finance minded. I mean, it's okay to be analytical. It's okay to be a bean counter. It's okay to not be hugely comfortable in rooms full of people. But if you want to progress in your Treasury career, in my experience and in my observation, networking is crucial. Treasury is an area where there are so many resources where you can do that. Conferences. I mean, everybody should be attending a conference at least every 2 years. AFP, the ACT, Eurofinance. I mean, those are kind of the best known and probably most accessible, depending on your level. But go to a conference, bring stacks of business cards, and I mean, you'll read this in lots of networking books and things, but it's very true. Bring your business cards to every event. Put them in your pocket, put them in your purse, and hand them out and get one in return and hold on to them. And then maintain those contacts, because if somebody leaves and you have their business card, tough luck. So you need, maintain contact with those folks. And LinkedIn is an awesome tool. Maintain and polish your LinkedIn profile and ask other people to look at it. I've done that. Ask your peers to look at it, especially ask your Treasury peers and in your network to look at it and pick it apart, and get a little bit of thick skin. We all love to talk about ourselves, and some of us may think that our resumes and our LinkedIn profiles look great, but constructive criticism in those areas is hugely valuable. And again, this is coming from me, who's not the most natural networker. Groups like this are hugely important. And I'm not, just saying this because we're talking at this particular moment, but join your local AFP group or ACT group. There's lots of regional and local resources for Treasury people. And if there isn't one, go start one. Another area I would mention that often goes overlooked is contact your banks and ask them if they have advisory boards. And if so, how do you get on one? Most banks have client advisory boards for one thing or another, whether it's their treasury management system or their customer service group. That is hugely valuable, and you would be amazed how much access you will get to not just Treasury people, but people all throughout the finance realm.
Ben, I just wanted to quickly give some color to the listeners. You spent 5 years, when you talk about that rapid growth, that was with the business that is now FIS. So back in the day called Fidelity National Information Services. So 5.5 years with them. You then went with a spin-off, Black Knight, and spent 5 years with them. And then the last 7 years have been with APR Energy. So just wanted to give some color there. And obviously, Ben went through some of the spin-offs and the growth strategies, as well as working in a big business. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what he's been talking about there. I just wanted to ask you, that role, or the roles that you've had in the companies that you've worked in, have been very global. And you've also worked in some really challenging countries like Yemen, Iraq, Angola. Give us some of your war stories about some of the challenges you've had in some of those roles.
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate to work for some companies with significant global exposures, and my most recent employer did business in some very interesting and difficult places, but that's where their business was. It was an energy company, and they had no business in the US, for example. So all of the business was out in the big bad world, which was great for me. That was very much in my wheelhouse, very much something I was comfortable with. But it is also important for anyone as a Treasury professional to sort of distinguish between world zones. You know, when you're talking to even people within your own organization, they might say, "Oh, we're a global company." Yes, if you are doing business in your country and another country, you are a global company. But certain companies can give a whole new meaning to global. And my background, I spent a lot of time working for companies, and particularly on transactions, which was hugely valuable for me, but where we were investing in frontier and emerging markets. So countries that definitely weren't on the G10 currency list, but also countries that wouldn't even be considered second. All these terms kind of meld together, but second world. These were definitely third world locations. And, you know, it's important in Treasury to be really nimble. I mean, you never know what business case you're going to be handed next, or what to work on, but every single one of those is an opportunity. You know, some particular countries where I have experience, and I'm grateful I do, but boy, it did not probably add years to my life. You know, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Angola, all over Africa, multiple countries in Southeast Asia. But you don't, unless you're in the C-suite or a member of the board, you don't get to choose where your company invests necessarily. And especially in Treasury, and this is part of why I love it, we're often handed that presentation or pulled into that meeting, and you know, you find out we're going to X country. So kind of going back to what I hit on before, that's a huge opportunity. That's a huge opportunity. Go out and learn everything you can about that country. And I love Wikipedia, but don't go to Wikipedia first. You would not want to put Wikipedia in an investor presentation as your source. Go to your banks. Your bank network is one of the most valuable things you have. And your banks obviously have a vested interest in your company's success, but you can make it so that they have a vested interest in your personal success. If you're an analyst, if you're a manager, if you're a director, and you're part of a team or individually tasked with learning how to do business in a global jurisdiction, go to your banks, call your relationship management officer, call your cash management officer, call your trade credit officer, anybody who has a little bit of a global bent or responsibility, and say, look, I need to figure this out. What do you got? Call your auditors. If you don't have access directly to your auditors or some sort of advisors, not every company on earth works with the big 4 accounting firms, but even companies that fall into the big 10 global accounting firms, most of them have massive advisory arms that produce very, very good white papers on many, many countries. And you know, go to them and ask them for those white papers. When I joined APR Energy and was handed the list of countries where they did business, I couldn't pronounce 3 of them, much less know where they were. So it is, again, it's my particular experience has been sort of opportunistic in that way. You don't always get to choose who you work for or whether they or not they have global experiences, but a good example about, I would say, 3 or 4 months after I joined APR, I was told, I was not asked that I was going to Libya to try to collect some money that wasn't being paid. I was told. And I had 36 hours to get there. So, and I just brought on an assistant treasurer. Luckily, she was fantastic and one of the best people I've ever worked with or will ever work with. So she could hold down the fort while I was gone, but off I went to Libya. And, you know, take advantage of those opportunities. Don't be afraid if you have a little bit of an adventurous bent to raise your hand and say, you know, if you need somebody to go and flesh out what this looks like in person, I will be that person. Now, the world has obviously changed for travel, but I don't think any of us expect that will last into perpetuity. But even if you don't have to travel to that place, say, how do I become part of the tip of the spear here? And you will be amazed how much you learn. And then, like I said, reach out to your network and make it their responsibility as well. You will all benefit.
So some of these challenges that you've faced obviously would necessitate probably a little bit more creative solution than what you might find in your average day-to-day treasury. So can you talk a little bit more? I mean, when you and I first spoke, Ben, you talked about how much you love treasury because you can be creative. And so I'm curious if you can share an example or two of creative solutions you've come up with along the way.
Yeah, sure. And I did write down a little list here, but I think, Scotty, that's another great question. And like you said, Treasury is just it's a great place to be creative. We are responsible every day for, number one, preserving capital, but number two, making sure that capital can move efficiently within the organization. It does nobody any good if the company invests a certain amount of money into a certain country and can't get it back out. That becomes a very pesky line on the balance sheet or a financial statement disclosure that treasurers and CFOs don't like because their bosses ask them about it. So for Treasury specifically, I guess one of the things I always challenge myself and folks I work with to do is, well, number one, learn how to read financial statements. Absolutely crucial. You don't have to be CPA level to the point that you can prepare them. Don't hand me a Word document and ask me to prepare a 10Q. I probably won't be able to do it. But I have become very good at reading financial statements, tearing them apart. Get good at that. Question every single line within that cash and current assets and current liabilities line on the balance sheet. Why is it there? Why do we have receivables aged past 90 days? Why do we have a legal contingency liability? Walk into your controller's office, your credit and collections person's office, meet with your general counsel or your head legal representative, understand those things, and then go about, like I said, reach out to your bank network and say, we have a receivable that we haven't been able to collect in X days, and what options do you have, or do you know anybody that can help with that? Fairly recently, I had to deal with the crashing currency situation in Argentina. You know, the currency was crashing and the country instituted very draconian currency controls and capital controls to the point where companies outside of Argentina could not get their capital back out. Well, that was a huge issue for my employer at the time. And so we explored a number of alternatives, but one of the things we did was reach out to our banks, and both our local and global banks, and say, you know, we're all in this boat together. What ideas do you have for us? And they came back with a fairly interesting set of alternatives. One of which was basically buying a combination of blue chip Argentine stocks and bonds locally in Argentina and immediately selling them to a counterparty outside of Argentina. So the company I was working for, who was not, an investment firm willing to take that type of risk, was sort of shedding the risk. Now that had a cost to it, everything does, but I'm not sure we would have come up with that if we hadn't kind of gone out and said, we need help here. And this is a situation that's not just impacting us, but hey, banks and counterparties, this is going to impact you at some point. I worked with another receivables issue out of the country of Angola. Our local customer was not paying us or really anybody else. And that became a massive exposure for us. And again, it was while the lawyers were working on a legal solution, which ended up being the solution that did the trick. I had reached out to my network and actually found one of the only receivables factoring firms on earth that was buying Angolan paper at the time. Again, it would have come with a cost, but sometimes within Treasury, the best thing you can do is come up with, first of all, identify the risk of the problem, work with your network and your experience and your knowledge to develop a solution, and it may not be perfect, and present it. Looking at the cost of that Angolan solution sort of made me nauseous when I first looked at it, but that was a whole lot better than the piece of paper that the exposure was written on. The piece of paper was more valuable. I think another couple examples for me personally, and again, this is an area where I had to challenge myself, and I would challenge anybody. If you have the opportunity to go figure something out in a new place, raise your hand. Libya, the company I worked for went into Libya very shortly after the 2011 revolution. And we had a government contract. We were there to help the country and the people. But the banking system, the government systems were far from functional at the time. There were still various tariffs and sanctions. And so we had to sort of navigate that quagmire, and I kind of became one of the subject matter experts on that. And the reason for that was, then I reached out to my banks and said, how can we accept this massive government contract from the country of Libya, which will benefit all of us? And we ended up structuring for the time, fairly unique export letter of credit, but we made it work, and we're able to shed the Libyan sovereign risk onto two of our banks who could take that risk much better than we could, and that's how we got paid by Libya. Myanmar, we were the second company into Myanmar after Coca-Cola. I was in the same room with the Coca-Cola folks, waiting for a meeting with the Minister of Finance in Myanmar. But that was a great opportunity. Myanmar, after sanctions were lifted by the US in 2016, they were coming out of the dark ages and they weren't sure how to accomplish contracts or business with global companies. And we were able to go in there and help them learn and say, here's what you need to do, and here's what we need to see. And not just us, but anybody who's going to invest in your country. And I guess that's another note I would make is, kind of go into all of your interactions as a Treasury person with the most collaborative mindset you can. Don't wall yourself off. Don't be so protective of you and your secret knowledge. Everybody's got their skill set and their knowledge base. We as Treasury people like to think that ours is sometimes more important. Sometimes it is. But go into those interactions, and especially with your banks and your colleagues, your superiors, as collaboratively as you can, and show them that you're somebody who is willing to work across channels, work across functions, work with banks, financial institutions. And the more bankers and global financial advisors and auditors and tax professionals you have in your network, the better. You'll never be pulled into a meeting with the C-suite or a board meeting and say, I don't know the answer to that question and I can never find out. You may have to say, I don't know, but you'll be able to say, I don't know, but I'll be able to get back to you in 24 hours.
Oh, you're dropping a lot of great advice and spoken like a true Treasury professional who's been in the foxhole, so to speak, in many different foxholes, I guess we can say. Scotty, with that, I know you've been monitoring questions from the audience. Do we have any questions from the audience for Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. We do. And I'm going to try and translate the gist of the question, basically just to say that, it sounds like what the individual is asking is, how do you make it clear to the business the value that Treasury brings?
It is a good question. And again, it's something we as Treasury people take a little bit personally. I mean, it's almost like we want to scream out sometimes, don't you all realize if we weren't doing what we do every day, all of you wouldn't get paid and we wouldn't be able to pay our bills, and revenue is fine, but if you can't turn it into cash, what's the point? One of the best things, one of the best avenues I've seen for that, and I actually didn't come up with it. It was that assistant treasurer I mentioned that worked for me came up with this, and that is offer to hold. What does Treasury do? Seminars with every area of the business, but start with your peers. People in a finance group of a company should probably know what Treasury does, but don't assume they do. So then reach out to your supply chain folks, reach out to your logistics folks, your product development folks, your salespeople, hugely important. And this is true of anything that you ever set up or do, especially on your own or create. If nobody shows up, that's okay. At least they have the opportunity. And it is more difficult in a large organization, but kind of going back to one of the things I was asked earlier, in addition to learning as much as you can, regardless of your level, I try to do this as a treasurer. I try to always be learning. If I don't know something, I want to go learn it. So that should be applicable to every level, but create a roadmap for yourself of where you want to be, where you are, where you want to be, and let your organization know about that. That is one good way. Everybody listening should maybe in the next 2 weeks, create a little roadmap like that, go to your manager or managers and say, here's where I am, here's where I'd like to be. Here are areas where I will acknowledge I'm a little bit deficient. And here's what I need to get better at those things. You're going to benefit yourself and you're going to benefit the company, but it's also a good opportunity to say, by the way, could we do a little education seminar with certain areas of the business? I'm guessing that question came from somebody who has either been asked or observed there's an area of their company that doesn't know what Treasury does. It's pretty important that they do, because even if it's somebody who is traveling in a country somewhere and their corporate card doesn't work, they may not know who to call, all the way up to a salesperson is sitting in the room with, negotiating a contract, and they don't know if they can accept a certain currency or payment type, they need to know who to call, and you shouldn't assume that they know. So offer to do little seminars for the business, and if that's not really something your company is willing or able to do, then start working on your own little write-up that you can take ownership of, pass up to your manager, pass up to the treasurer, and say, here's what Treasury does. Throw it on your SharePoint, throw it on your intranet. The worst thing that can happen is nobody reads it.
That's awesome. It's acting with intent. It's taking action. It's giving actionable steps and actually educating your stakeholders throughout the business, whether or not they know what you do or they don't. I love it. Don't make assumptions. Just, hey, we talk about quite a bit how nobody outside of Treasury really understands Treasury, and those are some excellent ways just to start educating people and getting them familiar with what you guys do day in, day out.
Right.
Scotty, do we have any other questions from the audience?
No, we don't have any other questions. Just a lot of really positive comments on the actionable advice. To your point, Joe. So yeah, thanks for the great answer there, Ben. I don't see anything else that's come through at this point.
Well, perfect, Ben. Great stuff. I mean, thanks again for joining us. You know, you have an awesome story to tell. You certainly have a unique story with all those various countries that you've worked in, and you know, you've given a lot of great advice, I think, to practitioners who are even those who are already established, but also plenty to those who are working their way up. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean this to necessarily be a you know, an advice seminar, but I was telling Simon earlier, I would have paid a lot of money for the ability to interact in this way with you know, a treasurer early in my career, because I kind of identified very early in my career, I want to be a treasurer someday. Had no idea how to get there or what to do. So this, you know, this is a great example of a good network that people should absolutely use. And like I said, use your banks, challenge them, and don't be afraid to walk into your boss's office in the next couple of weeks and say, here's where I want to be. What do you think?
No, it's great. And I mean, to your point, it's an advice seminar, but these are the things that we talk about, not from the practitioner's perspective, but from the third party perspective all the time. So to hear a practitioner, you know, delivering that type of feedback and those types of suggestions to the audience, I mean, it's great. And that's why we have these conversations, is to bring the Treasury community, or get that exposure for the Treasury community to treasurers who've sat in the seat, to be able to give their points of view. So again, great stuff, and thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, well, we'll take you off the hot seat. Treasury community, thanks for jumping in as always, and asking questions along with us. We hope you enjoyed this. Every Friday, again, Ask a Treasurer, where we will, it's an Ask Me Anything format with treasurers around your careers, networking, advice, anything like that. And then on Mondays, we have Ask a Treasury Recruiter. So Ben, you're officially off the hot seat. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.